This is the third conversation with Matthew and Inma, and we do what Matthew talks about at the very end, which I'm not sure you will hear, but I heard it. Um, of stepping into the pool of us, the three of us in this conversation, and just go with the flow and truly do that. So we speak about god fortsättning, which is the Swedish term used now. Today is the 4th of January, and up until New Year's Eve, you can say Happy New Year. But after, say god fortsättning, which kind of means have a good continuance. So going down the language hole and then coming up in relationships to the body, to the earth, to all that is. And yeah, these two are two of my most favorite people. So it's a treat to get to spend a couple of hours with them, and I hope you feel the same. So enjoy. I I thought I recorded ages ago. Sorry, I recorded my sound, but that doesn't really help. Now we're recording. Thank you. Remind me earlier next time, like when you see me, because I thought I pressed record.
I'm very sensitive to that little red light, so I mean, it's my friend. I'm not sensitive to it in that I get shy necessarily, or at all.
No, no.
So tell me again how that happy continuation is said, please.
So in Sweden we say god fortsättning.
Gud
Gud
fortsättning.
fortsättning.
God
Gud
fortsättning.
fortsättning.
Yeah, which is what you say after New Year's Eve, sort of, a day or two, you can say Happy New Year, but then you say god fortsättning.
Gud fortsättning.
Gud fortsättning.
Swedish is a very, very. I've just begun recently to take tentative steps to being a Swedish speaker, or as I've been playing not music lately, I'm thinking of myself as a not Swedish speaker, but not letting that stop me. And but there's something, there's an acting teacher told me once about this might have come from Peter Sellers or someone. I don't know who it came, but maybe it's just common knowledge in the acting world. But there's something to acquire an accent, so that's distinct from a language, but it's also a part of it, right? To acquire an accent, you align yourself with this. It's an accent is translated into an attitude, or that's what you're actually seeking to pick up. That if you can pick up the attitude, if you can identify and pick up the attitude, the accent flows naturally. And so, in listening to, not so much in listening to Swedish, I mean, I do hear it, but it's when I start to try and speak Swedish that I realize just how far from my own ability to pronounce anything.
Make sounds,
Yeah, that there's not even just individual sounds, but a flow to it. There's some kind of a rhythm and a method of accentuation that is very distinct from anything that I've ever spoken, which is not much more than English, a little bit of French, a little bit of Spanish, but and so, but it's interesting how it's not until I actually begin to try to say something that becomes I'm really kind of confronted with that. But then that also makes it like then I've begun in a way. Like in a way, that's like the first traction in terms of speaking something. So
yeah, and I mean, all sorts of things pop. One is when my pre-cal teacher in the US, when I was a foreign exchange student, I came in August, September, and I think school term starts in September. In December, he found out that I was Swedish because he thought I was from Minnesota because of the
Right.
tilt. But I had kind of, it made sense for him that I was from Minnesota. Um, but this thing about it's not until you actually try that you understand. I get that all the time with, you try to do a yoga pose or just do push-ups or the thing that my 7 app says you should do with your legs. And I'm going, yeah, sure, no problem. And then I try, and my leg said, you are not doing this to me. It's like, no way, not going, why can't I? It's like, I don't have the language for it.
Right.
The physical language for it, it's not in me yet. Because as you say, I don't take that as I won't ever be able to.
Right.
I take it as right now, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to, but word-wise, I have it. It's kind of easy for me to try different words and make them sound the way they should. My sister-in-law is Thai, and Thailand. Thai language has a lot of weird stuff compared to Swedish, but it's like I can hear it, I can make sense of it. And I don't know if it is that the Swedish we have sounds that a lot of the languages of Earth don't have, I think. We're nowhere near what like the
Right.
San people of South Africa, and because those are really, really hard. But so I haven't. It's those types of words. Dominic tried to teach me now and again, doing these
Yeah.
really weird words that are. It's like I don't where to put my tongue, but English or Spanish or Italian or Latin is like I can find the position of it.
Well, all of those are coming from Proto-Indo-European, ultimately, which is
But I
something.
can do Thai too. It's like I can
Okay. Yeah.
pretend
Okay. Thai
to
is
do
not so.
Chinese or
Yeah.
Japanese or it's like I've played with like various languages. Finnish isn't really easy either, but it's not because it's hard to pronounce, it's because the words are like 50 letters long with just consonants. It's like, how? Welsh, that
Yeah. Yep.
Llangwelyn, whatever the longest.
Yep.
There can
Yeah.
be some tricky stuff there.
Yeah.
Well, and that happens some in German too. It might have more to do with what happens in Finnish than it does with a Brythonic language like Welsh. But the long, I mean, the German is like words put together, as I understand
Yeah,
it, which I
which
don't
is
know if
same
that's
as Swedish. So for
okay.
me, those
Right.
are,
Right.
I can decipher long
Right.
German words. Long
Right.
Finnish
Not
words are just
different.
stacked consonants with a couple of vowels now and again.
Well, I think that Welsh and I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but Brythonic is the family, Bryth Onic, and I'm not positive about this, but I think that that family of languages is effectively an indigenous language family to Europe. So that it's got nothing to do with any of the Proto-Indo-European languages that came in, whether it's Germanic or Romanic or whatever else. It's mostly, I guess, Germanic and Romantic. So there's it's a, yeah it's I'm always grateful that those languages have survived to the extent that they have, because there's a strong diversity, like there's a strong difference between that and everything else. Like there's a great difference between Swedish and Spanish, of course, and they're still
A
related in
lot
a
of
way, right?
similarities. Yeah.
Right. But they were still related in a way that
Yeah.
Swedish or Spanish or English or German or Finnish are not related to Gaelic or Welsh.
Mm. Yeah,
It's
they come from the past, like.
yes, and from the place.
Yeah,
But I
exactly.
think Finnish and Hungarian do too. Or
Maybe yeah.
are they just branches like further down because they are something completely different?
I don't know about Finnish. I've wondered that about Finnish, particularly as you're talking about it today, as a Swedish speaker, it being so different. And I think it's Hungarian
Completely
that
different.
I've.
Yeah.
Hungarian is one of the languages that stumps
Yeah,
scholars, right?
because Hungarian and Finnish are those are related, and then everything else
Okay.
kind of is something else. Norsk, ugrisk, finsk, ugrisk. Well, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Basque is another one. I think
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the term is like in a family context. It's like an orphan kind of status,
Yeah.
like where there's
Yeah.
no one's they haven't no one's been able to figure out where it's from. Although there's some wild theories about various potential sources that are far away and stuff. But it may just it seems to me just as makes sense that it might just be indigenous, that it's a language that arose in the place and has remained.
Stayed
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like what you said about the attitude, because there is a distinguished accent in Scotland, which is from Glasgow. And I think to speak Glasgonian is to have Glasgonian spirit. If not, it's really, you put yourself in Glasgow. They say that Glasgow is made by his people. There has no frontiers. And I think with the accent, it kind of transmits also that attitude, like that it's not in another part of Scotland, it's just in Glasgow.
It makes me think of that as an expression of a people, like that there is a distinctness to a people, like Glaswegians, or a distinctness to Swedes, I would say in English, and or to Southerners in the U.S. or to even like Georgians in the U.S. or it can be as specific as you want it, but that has to do with but it's not just. And so, setting aside nomadic culture for a moment, that in what I'm pointing to has to do with a people a people that are held together by a culture. A people is to say a group of people are a people is an indication that they have a shared culture, and to me in this setting that is about culture as something that arises through the relationship of a people with a place. And so what you're saying about Glasgow makes sense to me along those lines.
Yeah.
And even nomadic people, they have a relationship with the place. It's just a broader geographical context through which they move. But you don't, over time, certainly Proto-Indo-European spread through nomadic peoples going further and further, but that turns into a colonializing process or something else, maybe just a diaspora, but that, nomadism is typically within a certain geographical context. It's just not settled like agriculture. And so you would still have a people, a culture of a place. And presumably, if this theorizing is correct, that an accent that is indicative of an attitude that is a part of that people and that culture.
Yeah. Also, in related to place and people, I would go, maybe it's a little bit push it too much, but I would go what is opposite to. In Glasgow, I think a lot of the attitude is I'm from Glasgow. I'm not from Edinburgh.
Edinburgh.
I'm not from any other part of Scotland. I'm from Glasgow. It's like there is a pool of tension in opposition that makes that attitude too, and the accent. From my point of view and experience, may not be real, but
well, it makes sense. I mean, it's like a negative definition. I mean, on a certain level, it's like defining what I am by identifying what I am not, and that's actually what, to some extent, we do in terms of self-identity with memory. I don't know a whole lot about this. I've read a little bit about it, but the idea is that we don't remember everything, right? So what we do remember is what we identify with, but how we get to what we do remember is by what we forget, right? So there's what's left standing is the sort of the positive aspect of it, as in positive space, not as in good, but what we can see. But what's fallen away is what actually is allowing the definition. Because if we hadn't forgotten all these things about ourselves, then we wouldn't be who we are. We'd be less defined, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it makes me wonder about these people who do remember everything. It's like,
Wow.
do they like then turn kind of more chameleon-like?
It was through the memoirs of one of those people. In fact, I think the first one known to science officially. So there may be a scale here, a spectrum, but this is someone who defines a medical diagnosis by being at the far end of the spectrum. That if she was born in the 60s or 70s, and if you asked her what day of the week it was on Easter in 1973, she wouldn't have to think about it. She could tell you the day of the week, what she wore, what her parents wore, what they had for breakfast, lunch, dinner, what the priest said at Mass, etc. And for her, it's like, oh wow, you'd be great on Jeopardy or something. Well,
it's a curse.
That's easy for us. Yes, it is a curse, and it was the defining problem of her life. And so she's talking about that in terms of identity. How do I know who I am if I'm unable to forget anything? Because this is a function of identity.
Precisely. Yeah, I've today I played Office at Caspian's today. And one of the things that we spoke about was something that we've spoken about in the creative community too, this aspect of validation, of somebody else seeing you and like sharing their view of you, sharing their appreciation of what it is that they see. This thing of being seen, and how that, like you say, Matthew, is like how what I have been seen as, what's been reflected back to me has definitely shaped me into who I am, for better or for worse, right? I mean, it really goes both ways, because we don't want that one, it's like, so maybe there are aspects of me that could have flourished in ways that would really have served me, but that my surroundings weren't too fond of. And how I have a friend who's also one of my coaching clients. He's stellar at this. He is so good in every conversation we have, be it a coach walk or an email or a text, or regardless of what it is, he always puts a positive spin on something about me. So it's like, and I perceive it as being him. That is in his DNA. He does that. But just working with someone like that, being around someone like that is like, wow. uh, because he's and I don't perceive it at all as being manipulative, or he's just in it for the gains that he can. It's like there's not. It's just it feels for me very, very genuine and very much just in his DNA. This is how he does it. This is what he does. So I always leave the coach walks that I do with him feeling great. you know I hope he does the same too, but maybe for other reasons.
I found it interesting because since we are in relationship, I mean, our identity forms in relationship. That's we are. That's what I mean when since we are what we are because we are in relationship, and bring it to that the parts we forget in order to identify ourselves as ourselves. That's a really great, I mean, a combination of is that opposites or is that complementary?
I think they're in relationship, whatever they are. I mean, I
They
really
are.
appreciate you bringing relationship in because it's there's some like connecting tissue there for me because as Helena, as you were talking, I was realizing that I mean, it's maybe not a new realization, but it's coming to the surface that for me, the problem has been on the other end of the spectrum from this woman who can't forget, and that I can't remember. Like I'm pretty confident. I feel like I keep getting indications that my memories are intact. I've just never been able to access them. And I mean, it's not. I'm not starring in Memento or anything. Like I can remember things. There are things I do remember. When I got here on the call, Helena, I knew who you were. I mean, it's
Yes,
not.
yes.
I'm not entirely without memory. And whenever I went foraging for photographs in a town called Clifton Forge, a little ways away from here, where I knew my great aunt raised her family, and I had a sense that we'd probably visited that when I was a child. And I asked my siblings at Thanksgiving, and they said, "What, you don't remember?" And I was like, "Aren't you used to this now? Like I don't remember childhood. Like I just don't have." And my siblings, and so this is how I know that there's something distinct about my experience, and that my siblings are just roll their eyes and and they'll say like, we went and Sydney took us to the train yard, and they remember a whole experience of a day. I went to that town and did not recognize it, and walking around that town, no memory. Like there's some sense of familiarity maybe, but no memory of it. And that's just I'm just talking about one day in my life, in my childhood, right? But that is across the board the case. And so I have these little snapshots, like little Polaroids or something of like, that's this house, that's this person, that's this, maybe even an event to some extent, but like I remember like a field day in elementary school and like some snapshot image of me pulling a burlap sack up my legs to do like a three-legged race or something. And but that's the extent of it. There are a few anecdotes here and there, but so then in terms of identity, you'd think, well, so if on one end of the, you'd think I'd be very well defined, and yet that's not the case. At least in my own experience, it may well be that other people have very clear definition of me, and in fact, that's sort of what I sense, have sort of had to grapple with. But so there's, in terms of relationship, though, there is when I started doing trauma work, doing work with a trauma therapist to move through, resolve my own what turned out to be developmental trauma, which I didn't know I didn't know anything going in. I just knew that nothing was working, and she uh, also became my teacher, Kate White, and she was talking about accurate reflection. That this is one of the core needs of an infant. She does a lot. Most of her work is actually not with adults, but with infants and young families, and so that was really wonderful for me because then that's where a lot of my problems begin. And so I have her perspective was very to the point and useful. But so if you get accurate, if a child gets accurate reflection, so if the caregivers are reflecting back like a mirror what they see accurately, as opposed to a cloudy mirror, a funhouse mirror, or something else, then that's the only way the child has. That's how an individual begins to know themselves is by the response in others, right? So through relationship, as Inma you were saying, and if you have inaccurate reflection, or no reflection would be even worse, but inaccurate reflection gives you a distorted view of yourself from the get-go, and then you have different relationships throughout your life, but it's all beginning from this point of misapprehending who you are by virtue you don't know that it's inaccurate reflection. You just know what's getting reflected back. So the assumption is it's all I've got to go with, so this is who I am. So then finding out in my 40s that, oh, this has never been who I am. But so in terms of what's possible, my sense is that there is if I can remember this language, it came to me when Inma was sharing, but that there is a need for people to be able to see you for who you are, and not to confine you in who they have decided you are, right? So there's an imposition that can happen of like, I like you this way, I need this in a person, and there's an imposition of that. But then it's not just that simple. It's not just that the absence of that is ideal, because there needs to be also like an openness or a quality of vision that is. I get in trouble in relationships because I know I'm not alone in this, but this has been my experience, because I see the potential in someone, and I confuse that with what's actually presenting. Right. Okay. And so that's right. So that's problematic, and it's also indicative of the kind of vision I'm talking about. So that you're
Yeah.
seeing someone not as a static stone in the moment, but that you're seeing there's a temporal stretch. There's a temporal spectrum there that you can see who someone could become, and that's part of why someone is attractive, because you see who they are, and then there's this magic of like, wow, like there's potential here, because potential is important. And so if you're surrounded by people who lack that vision, or for whom that vision is or who are more invested in the convenience of successfully imposing upon you who they want you to be, then you are confined either way. And so it's like there's a balance somehow. But all of that is, of course, like mediated in relationship.
Hmm.
It's fun to see both me and Inma like raise our hands and go, yeah, we
Yeah.
too.
We too.
I do that all the time, and it's like I also want to like I also want to be kind of honoring both myself and the other person in that in the now too, so that I don't hold someone to their potential, because that can really mess things up too. Um, but I, I wonder about this thing because I've been I have I have a good memory in general, but it is best from like my before and after moment of when my first husband called to break up with me just when I was pregnant with our first child and all of that stuff. So it's like pre that, less defined memories. Post that, really define memories, because I've been working so much with me also. But I, even before that, I noticed how my childhood, my memories of early childhood and up through the years was often less defined, less apparent. It's like I have books in that, in the library of memories, but if I compare it to some of my classmates, they had like shelf after shelf after shelf, and I had 3 books for this period of time. Like, and many of those friends are friends who have stayed in one place. People who, when I was living in Limhamn in Malmö, first grade until 7th grade, I had already moved a couple of times. I'd moved cities, and there were people here who were still living in the house where they were born, and their parents were still married, and this, that. And then when I moved up to Arvika in Värmland, 8th grade until first year in what we call gymnasiet, same there. I had people who had, and it could even be that their parents were born in that house. It's like, so this really long continuance to place. That I don't know if that is, again, if that is also part of the anchors that are there. And I also have a mother who had moved 16 times by the time that she turned 16. So she doesn't have that sense of place either, which might also have kind of helped me to not have that sense of place, right? Because I kind of saw the same in her.
It brings 2 things, or maybe 3 things to me. One is, speaking of relationship and identity, I had on Sunday, I had like a revelation, if you want, that I had memories. I have clear memories when I was a child, and there is what my father had. What you said, Matthew, my father had an opinion about who I am that wasn't accurate, but was really real for him. But he couldn't pin out that. The only thing that he could pin out, I was different. And that was a continuous transmission. And also another part of that was, because I was different, it was going to be for me difficult to survive in the world. He translated that to, you are a silly girl. So the other day, that memory came to me, that he calling me that obviously wasn't memory for one day, it was a continuous thing, reference. And I put the dots because things that other parts of my childhood were more accurate or seeing me, about the reflection they gave me about myself, that part obviously it hold, but it didn't hold as strongly as it could have been the only reference, right? But then I realized that there are people in my life today that has that same, and I was wondering, the thing is I am not that. I know I am not that, But again, I'm still sending or getting that reflection of me, which is 55 years later. Interesting.
Silly girl.
Silly girl. Or you are not, at some point in my life, you cannot cope, you are not going to be able to survive in this world. And I'm telling you, we are 6 brothers and sisters. I am the best on survival. And maybe it was because of that. Maybe it was because that reflection I didn't want, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate all there. But that was an interesting revelation about, okay, so I'm still getting that, I'm still relating to people that is reflecting of me. You are not going to be able to survive, cannot manage on yourself. Funny enough. And the other thing I forgot, the other reference I forgot.
Well,
Right,
what comes up hopefully it will come. In the interim, what comes up for me in listening to that is sort of a sense of I won't say the dynamic, but a dynamic that might be in play, that you're presenting an example of in your own life, and responding to as, coming from that, but not necessarily speaking about you, but that maybe this is a dynamic that is how each of us are shaped over time, on a trajectory, beginning with our initial relationships, these formative relationships with parents and their perceptions of us and their reflection to us of who we are, filtered through their own lens of awareness of, this child's going to have a hard time. They need to know that ahead of time and be prepared for it. Or, there's often a protective sort of element to that. And there can also be pathology involved. There can be, the results of trauma where it's just a parent is unable to see themselves clearly, and so then can't, if you're a funhouse mirror, you can't reflect anything straight to, anything objective back to anyone else. And so, but that moving on from formative relationships into the schoolyard, into adolescent relationships and romantic relationships and going to college and becoming an adult in the world, and the way that the kinds of relationships that we have change over time, and then we move from place to place and meet new people when we're fully established adults, and there's all these different ways. But that I'm thinking of, to bring a metaphor in, I'm thinking of the process of making a mold of something, like whether it's a cake or a toy or something, that you have this negative, you have a piece of metal, let's say, that's a hollow, that you fill with something liquid that then hardens into something solid, and you pop it out and you have, boom, one side of the cake or half of the toy or whatever. And so there's, on a certain level, we could call that a reflection, right? It's not like a mirror visual reflection. Well, it is visual, but it's this other way of that the hardened material that's poured into the mold, when removed, reflects back the shape of the mold. And that's the purpose of the mold. But so you could also then take that, so we have a negative and a positive, right? The hollow is the negative space. We fill it with positive material and we get a positive reflection. So imagining that I am born into the world as this positive material to fill a hollow, and that is the reflection of my family around me. And then I come out of that family and I'm shaped as a reflection of the mold I was poured into. So then I go and encounter other people, and as I interact with them, it's not exactly the same thing, right? It's not like I'm getting poured into this mold, because I have definition. I'm not just a liquid creature like I was when I first showed up. But so maybe, well, yeah. And so so Inma's indicating for the audio listeners that, like, maybe that's not exactly the case, or maybe that's not all there is to it, because then the metaphor breaks down if that's all there is to it. But to the extent that I am still fluid, or maybe am and am not fluid, that where I'm going with the metaphor is that by by dint, to use a more obscure English word, by dint of the way that I am defined, I am seeking out people that will meet me in that definition. I'm seeking out hollows that match my shape, right? And so what is that shape like? Well, it's like the mold I was poured into. It's like my family, right? Or it's like the individual relationships from that original context. And so then I find myself, and then I change context and I get changed by each of these interactions and so forth and so on. But there's a current always running through, unless there's some truly major breach, like I get enlightened or I have a leg cut off or something, that there's, there could be some traumatic event or some, totally redefining relationship, but that there's still some current running through from the original mold. And so I might turn out to be 55 and find myself to be surrounded by very similar reflections, or the same reflection in the faces of different people, in the relationships that surround me, and that is a result. This is a result of this molding process with the positive and the negative and the back and forth. I don't feel like I've done a very good job of explaining that, but did anything come across there in terms of what I'm pointing to? Okay.
And I immediately go to feet and shoes.
Oh, sure.
Right? Because it's like we're born with this engineering wonder that a foot is. It's absolutely astonishing what a foot is. And then we put it into today these shoes that are of a mold that push the toes together and make sure that the heel won't be able to do the thing the heel is supposed to do, and all of this. And growing up, you have grown feet with warped shapes, and you have bunions, and you have plantar fasciitis, and you have all of these
deformations.
Precisely. Thank you, Inma. It's all of these deformations because of the mold that I have been, or others, my parents, put my feet into, as opposed to me walking barefoot or in barefoot shoes that actually allow the shape of me to stay, to make sure that no parts of me atrophies, no parts of my muscles go unused, but that it is there. It's like the well-oiled machinery of the foot is allowed to work the way it's kind of supposed to be. And imagine growing up in that type of surrounding. It's still a protection, right? If barefoot shoes that my parents, if they had put me in those, they would have protected me from cold and from snow and from cuts and bruises, and possibly without molding me so tightly that my spirit isn't allowed to be. But if they were to put me in that type of shoe, what I am could still be there, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be barefoot shoes to each other.
Okay.
Go for it.
The food metaphor, or not so much metaphor, but the food analogy, it gets me to a scenario that is, because people care for you, they put you shoes, and then all that happens, right? With the water metaphor, we are 70%, actually we are water, and that's why I said
Yes, yes, yes.
So yes, obviously part of that water goes to the food, and the food mold into the chew that we put ourselves in, or our parents do, or but the water part of us could get to ice and could get to air, vapor, or really.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about, and that's the connection with the memory, when you were talking about people who stays in a place forever in all their lives, and has a lot of, because my sister is like that, and have a lot of identity based on all the memories that they have, and the memory of the stuff they have accumulated along the way. And we move, the stuff goes all the time.
Yeah,
exactly. So this water thing, I like it. It molds into the first process of, and then if it gets to ice, there is something that has to happen to there is a physical process that has to happen to become water again, right? Yeah. And through these molds, water going through ice processes, and again water, new molds, and I think through that's life. Okay, that's the metaphor of life. And then through those canals of rivers that we are the molds, and when we move through and shaping our identity, obviously there are the formations like our foot, right, or our feet. If we manage to keep going liquid, there is something there that is the essence of water, that is us.
Precisely. And even if you were to be 100 and you'd really have deformed feet, you can start to work them, those atrophied muscles and tendons and whatnot. It's not, okay, I'm screwed. Because you can turn into water again, but to the liquid part of it again. So there's always that, like, the possibility of reshaping in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like stepping onto the world stage in my bare feet right now, because in terms of this conversation, like to move it to connect this conversation to that and I won't even necessarily take us there, but just point to the door, and by noting a few things that are in this mix already, is that plasticity is one, phase transition is another, and that's maybe veering off in another direction
Phase
perhaps.
as in PH.
Yeah.
PHASE, as in the state change of a substance.
Liquid to
water, water becoming
exactly.
ice become
Yeah.
and then also relationship simultaneously with one another, person to person, and I mean that in the human sphere and beyond the human sphere. If we acknowledge the personhood of trees, of animals, of the planet, etc., which is also a recognition of agency in those others, right? But that,
Definitely.
but that also is a different kind of relationship landscape with our context, which is our home, which is our ancestors, which is all of these other elements, and so this began coming up for me with the shoe metaphor, which, as Inma pointed out, is not only a metaphor or an analogy, but that is also, there's something literal there. This is something I've talked about with both of you before, maybe not on the podcast, but that has come up, I know, in conversation, is that that our, if I don't lose my train of thought, is that, so that the way the I think of it about in terms of geometry sometimes. The anthropogenic space is a Euclidean. It's born of abstract left brain Euclidean geometry. There are straight lines, or they seem to be straight lines. They're the best humans can do at straight lines, because straight lines don't actually exist in reality, in tangible reality, because even the horizon is a curved line, right? But that in the natural world, in our actual home, if we step off of the concrete onto not just mown grass, but we go out into the woods and walk on tree roots and rocks and this, that, and the other, what is that geometry compared to a sidewalk, right? It's complex, it's diverse,
Complex,
it's alive, it's all of these other things. And so I'm just, to me, there's a lot of I'm examining my relationship with the terms hope and optimism right now, because I've been getting some new influences in regards to that. So I'm hesitant to use either of those words, but I feel encouraged. And this is the sort of thing that encourages me to be optimistic, and because I feel like a lot of the cultural surround when we step onto the world stage in conversation in terms of what do we do now? Like, how is this going to, like, what's happening? How is it going to end? Is it going to end? Like, there's a lot to be, it's easy to be cynical, pessimistic. It's easy to lose hope. It looks really dire because it is, and without discounting the gravity of what's going on in the world, in the relationship between humans and the earth, the consequences of all our actions, without like I said, without disregarding the gravity of that, there's also space for optimism. That doesn't need to be, and I don't know, like some people use the term cautious optimism. I know other people are using a word hope, like hope without optimism, I think is something that Nora Bateson and or Dave Snowden have referred to this phrase, and I haven't grokked that yet. Stephen Jenkinson sort of encouraged me, his writing, to move away from hope. I'd already kind of done that, because hope is always either about the past or the future, and which are both important, and also there's some value in being in the present. So, but not to get sidelined by a couple of terms here, that plasticity is the way you say, Helene, even if you're 100 years old and you've been wearing shoes since you were 3, your feet will begin to heal. I know this is true for the nervous system and trauma. We know increasingly this is true in the neurology of the human body, which is not limited to the brain. But there was this prevailing view for a long time that, we start dying when we're 27 or something, the brain starts deteriorating, and that's it. I hope you had a good time, but that's not actually the way it works. And so that we can actually, but the other thing I want to underline or point to within this mix is is about relationship, is about the relationship between humans and so I don't know how to use language to say this because it's kind of a meta perspective, but that the relationships between humans and the relationship between humanity and Earth. And insofar as we're not, top-down decision making is an anthropogenic feature. It's not a feature of the biosphere, of ecology. And I'm not separating humanity out from the biosphere, but we've kind of done that for ourselves, right? So through this process of top-down decision making, fungi don't do it that way, and they were here first, actually. And they're still here, and it's doubtful that anything we do that's not utterly catastrophic, which is possible, is going to shut down what fungi do. Like, they'll change, but that's what they do, right? And so, but mainly with them and others in the biosphere, in ecology, in the natural world, decision making is a bottom-up thing, or it's a person to person. It's distributed. That's the word I'm looking for. It's just the distributed decision making, which happens in relationship between one thing and the next, one person and the next, whether that's a fungal person or a botanical person or a human person. And so when distributed change happens, and this is where phase transition comes in, and this might be veering into something like woo-woo, and maybe not, I'm not sure. I haven't read extensively about it, but it certainly works as a metaphor for me, in that it feels like I recognize this as a natural dynamic, and therefore a teacher. These are the modules that I get from from Mother Nature in terms of lessons are in the form often of dynamics. So the way that how water responds to it, like how a stream responds to an obstacle, there is a lifetime of learning in that is applicable to how I move through my day, right? And so, and make decisions in my life. And so this is what I'm pointing to in terms of phase transition, whether we're reading about it from the TM, Transcendental Meditation perspective, where there have been subjective-based studies conducted that are maybe not the most rigorous science. And so that's why I'm saying maybe there's some woo here. But if we talk about this as a metaphor, then the way that change happens, the way that phase transition occurs is more or less all at once. That when water boils, you can see like little bubbles forming initially, but then it's not a linear acceleration from liquid to gas. That rolling boil comes in a moment, right? And so the same thing happens when water freezes. And so if we think about, I don't know, objectively, is that a distributed action? That I think about the way lily pads cover a pond with exponential growth. Like if that takes 30 days, then the pond is half filled on day 15. Right, or on day day 29. I'm having the wrong thing. I was never very good at. I'm with Einstein on simple math, but that day 29 is when the pond is half filled, and so then boom, like in a 30-day month, it's filled the next day, and so is that a distributed thing? I don't know. That's a question, but still playing. I think we can still play with this metaphor, even if we're mixing them with distributed decision making. But what I'm pointing to is there is a lot of wiggle room in the sense that you can drop your shoes at age 100 and your feet start to heal. And human behavior has driven the climate of the planet, the biosphere, to the brink of something very difficult. To put it mildly, and to just throw my hands up in the air and say, well, we were just a cancer on the planet. Like, to me, that's irresponsible and not grounded in reality, actually. That if there is still a way for us to change this, and if we know from teachers of natural dynamics, like streams and how water changes phase, that rapid change can happen with apparent ease toward a new coherence, then what if we look at that and move in that direction, let that guide us, like that dynamic guide us, and how we're seeing the situation we're in.
We saw that, didn't we? In 1 year, a lot of things came out.
You mean with the global pandemic?
Yeah.
Yesterday, me and Inma were in a reading retreat, and she picked up Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I said, oh, I'll go get mine too. So I started reading it, and before I did, Inma said, this book is our conversations here, these pod conversations, that's what is. And you had only gotten like, I don't know, a tenth of the book, like really just started. So there's that. So if anybody wants to read a good book, do Braiding Sweetgrass. And I've read 30 pages, but I can still say that this is a good book. But she in those already the first 30 pages, she speaks about doing a survey because she's a professor of ecology, botany, whatever, at some university in the US. She did an ecology class of some sort with students who were environmental botanists, ecologists, whatever, something like that, like really deep into the human imprint on Earth, let's put it that way, or modern man's imprint on Earth, perhaps more correctly. Asking them what positive things has humans, done to Earth. What's the positive relationship there? And none of them could come up with even one idea where the human presence, where humanity could be seen as a positive. And it breaks my heart to see it, and it broke her heart also to like recognize this, because it is precisely as you say, Matthew. It's like we are here, but to just look at us as if we are a scourge of the earth, of life, of the universe, it's like, no, that doesn't make sense. Actually, it doesn't make sense. Why would we be here then?
Yeah.
It's like, that doesn't make sense at all.
It's an imposition of a lack of vision, like we were pointing to earlier, right? But please go ahead.
That reminds me of this. If it's like we are so how to say this, everything is pointing to technology to solve the problem, obviously, but then I'm going to put an example. I think it will. I will be able to say what I want to say if I go through an example. In order to avoid more or to cut carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, one of the pointings that are coming up is everyone should be vegan. Everyone should be vegan. So if everyone is vegan in the planet, right?
Problem solved.
Problem solved. Not problem solved, but it's going to be better. It's going to be I don't know the percentage on my head, but it's like a 30% of less carbon, blah, blah, blah. And then I started to read and get why people, for me, it's totally out of sense. Like we were saying, what are we here? It's all the animals in the world are here for no reason. It's this relationship between animals and humans, not the one that exploits that we have done, but the relationship between is that what we want? Cut through that relationship. What's going to happen with the kettles? Who is going to eat the grass? because there is a relationship formed, maybe as you say, deformed with time, from the aspect or coming from the aspect of I can use this is a resource for me, and I'm going to abuse it. In that respect, okay, is a relationship by this deformed, but there is a relationship, like there is a relationship with everything else. Getting us to not eat, absolutely nothing to do with meat. Where is gonna get us? Okay, less emissions, but in the long term, yeah, it's a big question mark for me. Why even there are people pointing out to that direction? Yeah, for me, it's like I see that I can feel the relationship from with me and the planet. Should we cut everything, every relationship? Should we not even eat anything so we can maintain the planet? Doesn't make sense.
People want a simple solution to a complex problem, and there is no such thing, right? It's
Yeah.
like a single. It's like I've got the best single bullet that will solve. You know, it's like this will. And it's like no. For one thing, like and again, like, is that how Mother Nature does it? Right? Mother Nature is complexity, and everything that happens is complex in that context. And the humans are like, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So that means that this one alkaloid from this complex plant, we can just throw away the rest of it. I got the alkaloid that'll solve the problem. Hooray! And like, and it, so I see that. Why is it that other people don't see that? Like you know, I know we've been in conversation in various contexts about, and it's what you're pointing to, I think, is that there's how is it that, I mean, we're probably gonna get right back to McGilchrist here, but but the coincidence of opposites, the which hemisphere is dominant, like that why is it that other people can't see that? Like I've never been able to see the clothes that everybody else seems to say the emperor is wearing. Like what I can't see it, and they can't not see it. So how is that? I mean, I've come to see that through reading McGilchrist. For those who don't know who that is, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who wrote The Master and His Emissary, and more recently The Matter with Things, which I have not yet read. Inma may have begun that by now, but that certainly looking at the history of the Western world through the lens of the divided brain is one way of starting, for me, has been one way to start to see that clearly, how it is that I'm able to see these things, because I've been, by the grace of God or something, like able to retain a right brain experience in the world, which has made my life very difficult, but it's like a curse that is a blessing, or a blessing that is, I mean, it's just a blessing, but that it's been a very difficult path, but I haven't sought to be that way. But I think that is a difference in me. That is what makes me feel like an outsider in Western culture, because Western culture is a culture that's founded on, it's a culture that brought us left brain dominance, and that left brain dominance is what has brought brought humanity to the brink of destroying their home. And I was going to go somewhere else with that was also useful, but I've forgotten it. So there are a lot of ideas coming out at once right now.
I have just been, because I bought a new iPad, and when you do buy a new Mac, you get 3 months free on Apple TV or whatever it's called. So I started that 3 month, free trial just before Christmas, and I've been watching a series that they've done that's called See, SEE, as in actually see, vision with the eyes. And it's a dystopian, futuristic place with Jason Momoa, who's this gigantic He-Man of a person. He played Aquaman. Humanity was struck by a virus that killed almost everybody on Earth except for a tiny amount of people, but everybody who survived turned blind. And it's now 1,000 years after that event, and everybody is still blind, except vision is starting to come through again. But what has happened in these 1,000 years is that the concept of vision has become like the scapegoat, the explanation of why humanity was struck by this virus, it was because of our vision, because we saw and thought that we saw with our eyes, and we just made a total mess of the entire thing because we ignored all of the other senses. We ignored all of the other, that's at least my interpretation of this. So it's interesting to, I've been, it's like super, it's violent like crazy. It's like Vikings and Game of Thrones X'd. It's like they kill each other and chop off heads back and forth. But it's been interesting to kind of pick up on these, really subtle little things that they say about our ability to see or not to see, and how when we lean on one thing, if we lean on vision and ignore the rest of the senses, it really doesn't turn out that well. Not saying you have to take away vision for that to be true, but I think that's what is interesting now in 1,000-year hence, when vision is starting to reappear again. It's like the people who are then born with vision all of a sudden get blinded in their other senses, so that the vision is such a strong sense that we have. It makes up such a huge part of the sensory input. It's 90% of the sensory input in any given second, that I can understand. It's like it makes perfect sense that they've chosen this sense, because it is so easy to just focus on that and not look into the other senses and what we can sense through skin, through hearing, through touch, through barometric pressure differences, through moisture, through, it's like all of those things. So I've been connecting dots to the state of the earth, the state of humanity, where we are, and all of these, like probably going too far and connecting dots all over the place, right? But that's kind of what's fun about it. And so you've said, I think twice or maybe 3 times already in this episode, you've pointed out, Matthew, lack of vision, which is like, there's vision and then there's vision. It's like the actual seeing, and then there's the ability to imagine, to envision.
I'm just gonna say, and the water is transparent.
At times.
How come?
Well, there can be muddy water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what comes up for me is the question of context as well. So what are we looking at, right? So if I'm living in a square box, then that, because we talked about accurate reflection, because that's also what's happening, is we're only having reflected back things that humans have made, and that is we've made a monoculture of ourselves. Mm-hmm. What happens to monocultures in the face of disease? Nothing very good, right? No. That
Wiped
and
out.
So sort of a timely observation there too, right? But that, but humans, a species that's interrelated with others, like Robin Wall Kimmerer later in that book goes into describing the 3 sisters, and from a botanical, as a plant scientist, is able to speak specifically to that, and also
so
from an indigenous
corn
perspective,
and
beans.
Those are the 3 sisters.
Legumes.
Yes.
Yeah, and so she then expands that to the 4 sisters, because somebody's got to plant them, because now they're domesticated plants. They don't survive on their own. Mm. So we are in relation. Those 3 plants together as a polyculture, and individually as plants, have been shaped through the years through human relationship with them. And so they actually need humans to continue. And corn is one of the most sacred things in certain indigenous contexts, and not things, but persons, right? I mean, that I say this because as a, you know, an American of English extraction by and large, I grew up with corn in the grocery store, and you have corn on the cob, and there's nothing sacred about that other than saying grace before a meal, right? It's just another thing to eat. But that in terms of then, Inma, you were saying, or no, Helena, you were talking about when you first mentioned braiding sweetgrass, this question that she asks the students. She expands that or returns to that later with, or maybe she talks about it in that same section, but the question is, do you love the planet? And all of these young ecologists are just like, well, oh, you know, they're just vibrant with this positive response. And then she asks the question, does the planet love you? And like the life is sucked out of the room. And like, you know, people are getting small, and so she's like, so how is this going to work, right? What kind of a relationship is that, right? And so, and Charles Eisenstein points to this too with you know, what this leave no trace ethic. Like, I'm all for not littering, but leave no trace is going too far. That's saying we're not in relationship with the planet. That is saying, like, we've monoculturized ourselves. There must be a better verb, and we've separated ourselves out, parted ourselves out from the complexity of life, the life of the world of which we are a part, and we're in denial of it. Like, people don't want to acknowledge that they're part of nature. Not, I mean, I think it's out of some sort of guilt or shame often, but that we need to look at that. Because that, you know, there's a 12-step tradition in one of the MIDI 12-step programs or it's a concept, so something that is worked with, a principle, let's say, which is phrased as participation is the key to harmony. Right, so you can have melody without participation, but you need relationship to have harmony. And so if we want we want to have harmony with the natural world, guess what? We have to show up in relationship. We don't do that by not accepting graciously the love the planet has for us. We need to open the door to that perception, and that is about perception, I think, and it is about the sensory experience. It is about, in terms of vision, it's about, are we just looking at four white walls, or are we are we seeing the natural world around us in all of its complexity? And letting it reflect back our nature to us is part of that.
Just a hands-on way of being in relationship and using the senses. This weekend, it's been unseasonably warm here. So it's been 10 degrees Celsius, which is like 50 Fahrenheit. It's been quite moist and raining today, but I've been out in the garden both Saturday and Sunday. And Saturday, I was working with the bokashi soil because I created bokashi soil factories in the fall, and now I needed the containers that they were in so that I can continue doing that inside, because the one container I had is already filled, yada yada. So I was working these soil, you know, it's like, I don't know, 50-liter containers or something that I have. I was working and I was sticking my nose into it, smelling it to see what's the smell of this, what's the texture, what does this, is there life here? It's kind of what I was asking, you know, and is there life here that is beneficial, that will be regenerative, that will be nourishing the plants, that I will be recording. That was interesting. You just disappeared. Okay, I'm recording again and we're back. I was saying I was gonna plant if the soil will be nourishing my plants and whatnot. And just 3 years ago, or at least 4 years ago, I wouldn't have known to even start to be in relationship with the soil in that way.
Mm.
Dominic has been guiding me. He's like, because I've been saying, does it need water? And he's like, feel it,
Yeah.
right? It's like, does it need more,
Touch.
is this good or not? It's like, smell it, take, feel it. What's the texture? What's the, you can even taste it, right? So that's kind of a real life example of this being in relation with using the senses. And that's circle close. That's where I wanted to kind of pop in, so that it doesn't just kind of feel like it's super out there and not
Abstract.
applicable and precisely abstract, right? But it's like it is doable here now. It's like, if you have a plant inside, stick a finger in the soil. What does that soil tell you? You know?
It's almost like, so the body has never not been part of nature. Like if
Yeah,
we have a
exactly.
question about whether or not we're a part of nature, just examine the human organism, right? It's a biological entity. And we each are, the consciousness of each of us is centered in one, right? And so we and our as such, our body has knowledge, our body has instinct, our body knows things. Our body is the result of a really, really long process, right? Like it's, this has been, the bodies that we inhabit are the result of many changes over a very long time in
Mm-hmm.
relationship with the context of life. And so we have this cognition going haywire that is increasingly left brain dominant, that can't see the whole picture but is really good at parting things out.
Mm.
And if we if in it's been pointed out that if you can be in your body, you're in the present moment, because you're not remembering something or thinking ahead. You're not worrying about the future or regretting the past or hoping about the future or whatever. But that if you're in the experience, the sensorial experience of your body, you're in the present. But that also through that, you can allow you can choose, as you have agency, just as you can choose what you think about, you can choose to let your body guide you, to let your body teach you. Your body has information that your cognitive brain does not. It can become available to your thinking mind, but you can have a relationship with your body. And when you're talking about the other senses, I was thinking about interoception, which is the technical term for internal sensation. And I don't, and it's not even necessarily some, well, it's, I guess, encompasses a number of different things, but that by tapping into interoception, I can find out what my nervous system state is, because it's how the body is communicating with itself. The brain distributed throughout the nervous system of the entire body is there's constantly traffic, sensory information moving through that, for decision making in response to what's going on around me. And so I think of it as a certain summation of a lot of sensory inputs. So if I tap into my interoception, like I'm tapping into this river with a lot of tributaries, with a lot of sensory tributaries. So when there's incoming information, 80% of the information that travels through the nervous system is traveling from the body to the brain. And so that's all coming from tactile from all the different senses, right, including the internal senses. And so if I tune into that, if I develop a relationship and there's a certain skill to becoming aware of and being with and tracking and then interpreting what that information is and means, that's an enormous resource that we tend not to engage in our culture because, as I've pointed to before, in Western culture, the body is the pedestal that the statue of the head rests on, right? It's an inert, meaningless, it's just there to support the head, which is, we all know, the important thing. Which, of course, there's a lot of sensory apparatus centered in the head, so there's some significance to that. But this is more about like cognition and rational thinking and reason and all these things. But then when you're talking about the soil, and Dominic says we'll feel it. It's like we have to be taught that as adults. Now we don't have a relationship with the earth, with what literally the soil is the earth, but also the other people of the earth, the trees, the plants, the animals, etc. We're always like, no, oh, don't go there. We're afraid of rabid foxes. We're all the things. But that is when we step into relationship with that. There's knowledge there that's available to us. When we're in relationship with it, and that's about coming down off of our pedestal. Essentially, it's about coming down into the body to embody the natural reality of our organisms in relationship with the context in which we live, the life of the world. And so there's I think mainly I'm just pointing to the availability of a great deal of resource in the body and through the body in relationship. But that requires regarding the head as something other than a statue on a pedestal, right? It involves inhabiting the entire physical body, the entire organism, and not just identifying with the part that thinks or the thinking itself.
Yeah, and that also is part of the question that she asked, that Earth loves, does Earth love you? Is also that connection is, oh, that's why my body doesn't love me, right? My body doesn't love me because it's all he. Yeah.
And a lot of people don't love their bodies.
Yeah. Well, they have what Matthew said, they have no relationship with.
No, precisely.
Yeah.
Is of course they will think in their head that they love their body because they are training every day or to get better with their bodies accordingly to the left part of the brain. Getting better with the body is not being in relationship with the body, is being here and telling the body from here what I want you to be. Like we tell Mother Earth what I want you to be from here. And then that not being in relationship gets to the point of talking, even in conversation with friends or whatever, my body doesn't love me. Not as a metaphor, as a real thing. My body doesn't love me. I don't eat this because my body does. If I eat it, my body doesn't love me. The same like we do with nature.
And that's interesting because it also is. I've been vegetarian since 2015, and before that, maybe 5 or 7 years of being a flexitarian, which for me meant to avoid all industrial meat. So I could eat game or, whatever was like not industrially raised or fished or whatever. But I've been doing a data-driven fasting thing for the past 2-3 months, which has been really, really interesting because it's basically saying what my system needs when it needs it is absolutely unique to my system. And they have discovered this little way of actually finding out that system by using a blood glucose measurement device. So, when you feel hungry, test your blood sugar and see where are you compared to a trigger that is then come at through a baseline of just eat the way you do, but measure before and after you eat, which has been really, really interesting because I'm finding out what makes my body just sing happily, when I eat, because my body says, please give me this. I want this. And when now and again my brain pops in saying, oh, I should want this thing. And my body says, no, I really don't. Yeah, you do, because this, that, and the other thing. And so I eat it. And I'm coming into a relationship with this in such a physical way. I can feel how unhappy my body gets because of the sensations in it, of it, what it feels like an hour after I've had that thing that I love up in my brain. But if I take my entire me into it, maybe I don't love that so much anymore. So it's been really, really fascinating to come into relation with my body that tells me all of these things that that are extremely helpful for me to know what to eat, when to eat it, how much to eat it, in a way that will make, that I believe, like, nature is set up this way. It's like we all of the people, like you say, the tree people and the fungi people and the animal people and the human people, all of us have this innate knowing of how to nourish ourselves. We're just kind of rationalizing out of it and sort of stepping away from that, thinking, no, this is what we should eat. We should eat it this way. It's like, no. And what I should eat and how I should eat it might not at all look like what either of you, what your bodies, what your system says that you should eat and when you should eat it. And I have actually been thinking about, I'm curious to know, because I'm starting a macro challenge, a macro masterclass, finding out the protein and carbs and fat. It's like, what's the level that makes my body sing? And after that, you can go on to a micro masterclass where you actually fine tune. Am I getting all of the nutrients that my body needs? But I've been pondering the thought that maybe I will turn flexitarian again. If it turns out that, okay, you have this, but you lack this thing. I cannot see myself ever going back to being an industrial meat eater and eating, like you say, the meat or product that are produced through that deformation of that relationship. It's like, I won't. Is that I just won't. But that other aspect, the relationship aspect, and I mean, I do eat. I'm a vegetarian, not a vegan, and I want wool and I want leather, and so I'm not one of those who believe that veganism is the answer or one of the answers. It might well be for some people if that's what their bodies want and need. I don't know that.
I think that innate knowledge that you pointed out is also knows about the love.
Yeah.
It also is also, or maybe it's just law.
Yes.
maybe that's what love is. But I during the years, my industry, the hospitality, tourism, food industry, that relates to, I've been in it, through it, and I know, and my body knows, that November, December are big months. They are. I have been working in day to day enough, and my body knows enough. So my body has adapted to that. And the only time of the year that calls for sugar is that time of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a craving that it doesn't come from my head. It comes from, you need energy, woman. And quick. You need energy and quick, right? What amazing it is that the 1st of January is like that. The 1st of January is gone.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And I was talking with a friend the other day, and I said, I think it's time for me to change that pattern. Because it's not just the craving of sugar. It's to be balanced, to be in harmony. There is so much stress because the hours on 70 hours a week and things like that. There is so much stress going on that in my body is dealing with it. And my body loves me enough. And I know that dealing with it is part of the job, right? In this, because it's a period of time really concrete in the year, and blah, blah, blah. And now this year, I'm starting to listen to her. And she's telling me, maybe could be interesting to change this pattern from now on. Yeah, it's very interesting to and about this way of living with nature, that it from how you feel. That's the relationship. Food is part of that relationship with nature. So the way our constitution is so far in evolving, and it continues evolving. So the vegan part of the evolution, that if we go that way, we don't really know what that means for our body in the long term. Maybe we just our heads working or something. But even our brain, physical part of the brain, which is part of the body, needs animal fat. So hey, hello. So it's very interesting that how the same relationship, what she has, the same relationship that we had with Mother Earth, we have with our body too. And that question of, does Mother Earth love you, is also a question of, does your body love you? And it goes together. So at the moment, who wants a shortcut? That is a shortcut. Start with your body.
Well, and who is making the decision about the vegan solution, right? Like, or what? Like, so is that the head or the body? Like, is the notion that veganism is an effective single bullet for everything that's ailing humanity on the planet right now, or you choose your poison? Is it carbon? Is it veganism? Is it whichever single bullet we're talking about? Is that a bottom up? Is that arising from my body I'm responding to my body and discovering a posteriori that this is the solution? Or is this a cognitive left brain, I need a simple solution to a complex problem, a priori I'm deciding that veganism, that seems like a good one, let's go with that. And so to me, there's also something here with the top-down top-down, we think about top-down governance as political structure and decision making for the planet as that's a problem right now in terms of how do we turn things around, because what am I going to do, just suggest to Joe Biden that we do things differently, or right, I mean, like, no, of course not, right? And so that but that also but there's power in distributed decision making. It's just never going to be concentrated in one person, but that's appropriate, right? Because if we have power concentrated in one person, that's the model of the top-down decision making that's unnatural. Like that doesn't show up in the natural world. And that this is then also the same model as my head is making decisions for the rest of me, right? And that there's an alignment between a head of state, why do we call it that? And the head driving the whole, making all the decisions for the body and not listening to the body, but rather enforcing or imposing. Again, we're talking about imposition in relationship of like, I think this is a better idea, so I'm going to make you do it this way because I've got the keys and the steering wheel. Instead, we can choose to say, what does the body tell me that it needs, that therefore I need? Because I need the body. Like, what's the head without a body? Like, doesn't get very far, can roll. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to consider all of these aspects of life, really, and it is this me and Micah in season 1. I had just read or listened to an Akimbo episode with Seth Godin, where he spoke about colors and the 264 set crayon box, or however many it is, that for an artist there's not red, there's like a gazillion different hues of red, and they're all have their specific name, and the same is true for all of the other basic colors and everything in between. And it's a little bit like that. It's like a lot of us have kind of, I think, gone into this quite anorexic relationship with our body, the system that we are. It's like maybe we have 5 colors, maybe we have the colors of the rainbow, and that's it. We don't have the others. We don't know the name of it. We don't know the sense of it. We don't know the feeling of it. It's like, and if you can, okay, just add one, between the yellow and the blue, there can turn out to be a different kind of green. It's like you can add one by one, add to it. And I can, that's a metaphor that for me feels very, oh yeah, I can relate to different periods in my life where I can feel like I didn't have as many colors back then, and then I've added on and added on, and today I feel like I have quite a lot of colors in my Crayola box. It's like or crayon box. It's like I have, and I can just imagine, how many more are there? It's like, well, actually endless. Like in actuality, because you can always shift just one color molecule more or less, and you have a new one, right? So it's like it just never ends. It's infinite. It's like, well, ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it's like our senses. We have supposedly 5 senses.
We have so many more senses. I don't know. I read some book said there are 28 or something, where they add in all of these interoceptic, the baroreceptors. That's why you can kill somebody or knock them out if you press on the baroreceptors on the neck. And all of these.
And the intersections in between them.
Yes.
Relationships.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. And it's like, yeah. And it is this as above, so below. When you were speaking, Inma, about, does the earth love you? Does my body love me? As above, so below. It's like, so yes, you are right in that. Start here.
Start here.
Start here. Start where you are. Because all of us actually do have a body.
Yes.
Surprise, it's there.
And when you do start, then you're likely to find that, like we were talking about with plasticity, that even though you may have always had one kind of experience that's felt very static or even rigid, it's it's remarkable how quickly things can change and how much complexity of experience can arise by stepping into something,
Yeah.
by deliberately making the choice, exercising your agency to do something different, to listen to develop a relationship with your body, to put your hands in the soil.
Yeah. Listen.
Yeah, with everything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, to engage in relationship, right? I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's maybe at the heart of all of that.
yeah.
Is that and when we extend personhood beyond the human family, then the notion of relationship becomes different as well in our experience. Because relationship is a two-way street, right? I mean, otherwise, it's not. I guess you could say you have a relationship with something that's not. But even like my relationship with my guitar, like that's also a two-way street. Even I'm not necessarily granting agency, extending. I don't know that my guitar has agency or is a person, and yet I don't know. It gets kind of murky. But relationship is more. I think maybe more complex and has more nuance than we have perceived it as having, or we've been taught to perceive it as having.
Yeah.
Again, adding to the colors.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be in relation with, or relate to. Yeah. Maybe that's where we end.
Perfect.
Perfect ending.